I'm Rick from Cartridge Classic Cars. On this video, we're back on the 70 Cuda. We're going to jump around a little bit on the car. There's a lot of small stuff that we're going to end up doing in this video. We got some brackets up here on the Firewall that we're going to install. We have the upper cowl panel that we still have to prep out and install. We got to do a door jamb section patch right here. We're going to cut a little bit more of that. We're going to show some of that. And then we got some inner structure patches back in this upper area, and we got some work on this side of the drop down, the wheelhouse support that we're going to patch up. When I decide on doing patches versus doing full panels, it kind of goes, if I use that panel before, how much work and how much damage we're going to do to the rest of the car. For instance, a patch like this, it's easy for me to make this patch. It won't cost a lot of time to just patch these little areas up. It's already kind of cut off the car for those areas, and it's not going to do any more damage. If I was going to take this whole piece right here, one, I've used these in the past for the Cudas, and they don't fit as well sometimes. I mean, if it's the whole piece is rusted, it's the better of two evils, but sometimes up here it's got to be modified anyway. So at this point, it's easier for me to just patch what's there. The rest of this piece is really solid. So we're gonna go do that. We got some patching on the inside of these panels. We'll see how much we show on camera for time and just to keep the video moving. We're gonna put the inner outer wheelhouse in this car. We are gonna weld them together, but we are not going to weld them to the rest of the car. So you'll see that, and we're going to do the trunk drop offs and the frame extensions on the back. So that's where the video is going to start. We might end up doing door skins on this video. I haven't decided. Again, we'll see how the video's flowing, how fast we're going to go. If we end up doing the door skins, we'll show that. If not, that'll be on the next video. So stay tuned. Let's get some patchwork and everything done on this Cuda and get it ready for some new parts to really finish the inside structure and everything. We're going to start the video off with this door jamb outer patch panel. As you can see, we're not using the whole entire patch panel, but most of it. With these patch panels, when you buy them, just because you buy a whole patch doesn't mean you have to use everything. Just do what's easiest for you, and for us on this project was to keep the A-pillar in the car. Those are brand new upper A-pillars. You saw we did those on a previous video. We also did the inside part of this door jamb on a previous video. So with this one, it was easy for us to just cut this panel off. The rest of this patch was all right. It was mostly just bad at the bottom, and put it all together. With this whole video, the whole idea here is just kind of the filler video. You saw we done previous videos on this Cuda where we did the whole bottom structure. This car was basically nothing. So what we're gearing up to do in the future is, now that the frame structure and everything else is done, all the front engine compartment, we're getting ready to start the outer sheet metal part of the process of this car. The outer sheet metal goes pretty quick, and this car will almost be done really soon. So right now, this video is going to be the middle ground, the tying in the structure videos to starting the outer skins. We are going to do the door skins on this video. Everything worked out well with the timing. So at the end of the video, you'll see the first exterior skins on this video, and that will be the door skins. So I'm going to just take you through, and we're telling the story of this Cuda and how this one went together. So if your car is in a similar process, you might work like we're doing on this one and leave some of these patches for the middle. What the problem is, if on these cars, what I like to do, I like to keep some of the inner structure. It saves the owners and me lots of time. In the grand scheme of things, if we leave some of the structure versus cutting the whole, you know, windshield frame assembly out, the rear window assembly, everything out, and then trying to build it from the ground up. Well, right now, leaving this door jamb piece, let us jig off of it basically with the new parts on the other side. Then we could come back on this side and then jig off the other side. So that's kind of the idea on the process on why some of these patches were left till the very end, where I could just cut them out now, do the small patches that I want to do, and we just kind of nickel and dime the car here or there. I'm not showing everything we've done on this car. This car needed repair patches in every door jamb on the other side. At the end of the video, I saw it after the video was over, I gotta do the same wheelhouse support where they all rot out on the other side. So I didn't show that in the video. So this car needs a lot of little window jamb trims. I mean, if we went through every rusted spot and replaced it on this car, there literally be nothing left when we'd be building a brand new Cuda from the ground up. And yes, that's possible. I mean, there's a couple parts you have to keep, but I think in general, it's a happy medium where you saw this car, everything was blasted, everything was done. I think the owner's going to be happy. This car's exactly what he wants, and it's pretty much going to be a brand new 70 Cuda when it's done. So we addressed all the major issues and really transformed it, and everything else that was left I think was in really good shape. Some of the only parts that are still really usable on this car. So let's get to actual work of what we're doing right now. You saw we just put one wheelhouse together. I'll talk you through this wheelhouse. So what I'm doing, I did strip these wheelhouses down to bare metal. They were done in preparation on the last video, but that video ran on, so we decided to put them on this video. But what I ended up doing, I did the weld through primer covering them to make sure they didn't rust. I'm going to come back right now with the surface prep disc where I'm going to use my spot welder to make sure we get a good weld and clear off the areas to make good contact on the outside. We still are leaving all the weld through primer on the panels on the inside, and what I'm doing, I put screw holes on the initial test fitment where everything went good on this car. So we just got to put our screws back through our screw holes using as a guide, and then we'll come back through and we'll use our Pro Spot PR2000 spot welder. So what this is going to do, it's going to act like we just squeeze the trigger, and it's going to use a high rate of current and weld these two panels together. You'll see this done on all the areas that I can, as it really keeps the heat out of the panel. It really stops from burning any kind of epoxy or weld through primer, even more than a MIG welder would. And it really just saves time, because with a MIG welder, if we were doing this, I would sit there and put all rosette holes in it, like you see right now with this seatbelt bracket. So we have to put the rosette holes in it. We MIG weld it up, then we come back through and clean it, and then we got to make sure any area that was burnt around the pile has to be cleaned off before we apply epoxy primer. Where with this spot welder, we can just squeeze the trigger. It just does the current in a small rate right there, and it really saves on the time, and it's structurally sound. I mean, it's not going to be as strong as a solid MIG bead, but this is how the factory done these cars. And then what I do is I add about twice as many spot welds as the factory would. Actually, I'm going to add more of these spot welds than we would on the MIG weld because of the time limit. So you can see we're sticking the wheelhouse in the car. It fits really good. It's been in this car already one time, so I know the process on how this one went to fit. We got the back lined up with the trunk, how it came around. This is that one piece Dynacorn rear whole section that the owner bought for this car. Again, it seems like it fits up really well with both the wheelhouses, and you'll see in the future the trunk drop offs. What I like to do on the front, I like to make sure I line the front of the wheelhouse with the bottom of the rocker panel. You know how it just kind of curves around, and then the quarter should fit right on there. What we're going to do then, coming off there, we got the trunk drop offs. These are AMD trunk drop offs, so they also are fitting really well. Both the wheelhouses are AMD. They're fitting really well. So even these parts with different manufacturers, showing when they're jigged up properly, they really are fitting together, and it really shows how accurate most of these parts really are, even from these different manufacturers, at least the ones that are the high quality manufacturers. So as you can see, I put that trunk corner bracket in right now, and what I'm going to do, the trunk drop off, the wheelhouse, everything, and especially this corner bracket, I don't weld it in. I prepare all the holes, and I put some sheet metal screws in there. You see some vice grips. At the end of this video, you'll see we are going to weld the trunk drop offs. But as far as the wheelhouse goes, I like to keep that unwelded and screwed and clamped in place. What that's going to allow us to do is put the quarter panels on the car, because see, this wheelhouse, you can clock it, so you can turn the wheelhouse. If you have it clocked in wrong, especially let's just say the rear of the car was higher, you're building this car on a lift, or some of the parts are slightly off, the jig mount somehow moved. If that's slightly wrong, that's going to put your quarters at a different angle, and your wheelhouse might not line up with your rockers. Or let's just say it's a bad stamping on a wheelhouse. If that stamping's not right, you can clock it to counter counteract something else that is wrong. And if you weld it right now and you have it slightly off, well, then that's going to put your quarter panel in a bind. And I've seen when it happens, it'll actually move body lines on some of these cars. I've had customers come up to me and be like, well, why is my body line dip in the center where the wheel arch would be? Well, that's because the Wheelhouse is pulling it down, pulling it up. It's doing the quarter panel at a different angle than it wants to be. How you can avoid this in preparation is just screw the Wheelhouse in. We're going to test fit the quarter panels. You're going to see that in a video in the future, and we're going to make sure everything fits. If for some reason the quarter panel doesn't fit, we'll unscrew that Wheelhouse. I try to put my screws in an area that I can get to them from with the quarter panel on the car. Again, it's not the end of the world. As easy as these quarter panels go on and off, you could just pull the quarter panel back off. You know which way your Wheelhouse has got to go and then adjust accordingly. I think half the process on building these cars really is where to weld, what to weld, in what order they get assembled and welded, and what to leave loose so you can adjust accordingly. So moving on, you see we did do our firewall. We're putting the upper cowl panel in now. What I decided to do, you saw in the last video, we epoxied the firewall and then I epoxied the cowl panel off the car. That's going to allow epoxy both underneath on both sides of the cowl and on top. I got the weld through primer in the areas we're going to go through weld, and then I'll come back through and just seal it up with some epoxy when we're all done. So with this upper cowl panel, you can see I clamp the edges, I get everything centered, I have my mark right there, I know about where this panel goes, and I take the monkey on the stick and I know I just kind of press it right up with the wiper motor hole in there. And you know, when I get everything lined up, I screw it in, clamp it in, get everything good, and now we're going to put the hood hinge brackets to the cowl support braces. So with these, I did have to trim a little bit. These are the Dynacorn one-piece inner fender, shock tower, frame rail sections all together. With them, I found out they fit a little bit too tight on my jigs. Like I said, I believe my jigs are correct. You can see we're verifying our measurements. I've also took my measurements from the front radiator support all the way back. Everything looks good, but I did trim a little off the brackets and a little bit on the inner fenders. Saying that, I mean, it's not the end of the world. We're talking 1/8 of an inch here or there. There's some play in these cars. I don't think there's going to be any major red flags. We're going to see for sure when we get the fenders on, and if we have to adjust it a little bit, we'll just adjust it. No big deal. But the rest of the car, everything else is fitting really good. These brackets right here, I am putting those back on. Those came with all these inner fender supports, and there's just no way for me to get the firewall in on these pieces with these brackets and everything installed. So they were actually removed on this front assembly and they're being reinstalled. I guess this front assembly would be really good if you had a good cowl panel and firewall and you were just building on, like, you know, a platform without good jigs that you could just slide everything on there. But saying that, with these e-bodies, I found most of the time to find one of these with a good cowl panel or even firewall, it's far and few between. That seems like that's one of the areas, especially around the driver's side, that vent around there, it just holds water, and there's holes in almost every one I ever take apart. So more than likely the cowl panel's always coming off on one of these e-bodies. So the same thing I was saying earlier about the wheelhouses, this is another part that I will not weld until the fenders are on the car and I'm happy with everything. And really what I can do with these pieces, I can adjust the hood left and right, especially on the top bracket. So I leave all these there where they screw in. So if the hood needs to move to the passenger side a little bit or the driver's side, well, we can move the inner fenders ever so slightly. So instead of putting shims in these cars and getting everything centered up, or if something's out of square, there's our room of adjustment right there. So that's another area, like I said, I will not weld those brackets until the whole front end is on the car. Once I'm happy with the fitment there, then we can go ahead and do that. Now we are going to go through and weld the upper cowl panel. You can see the spot welder can't get in these areas, so we're going to just pull out the MIG welder, Like I said, we just run. I start in the center. I work my way over. There are screws and clamps the whole thing, so it's not the end of the world if you started from one end and went to other. I just like to work all my edges out from the center just so we don't bunch it or move it to one side or get any high spots. So I work my way around. I stop at the top of the cowl panel, and then again we're going to move our way to the spot welder where this reaches from the firewall to the upper cowl panel. I can start in the center of this panel. Same thing, work my way right around. You can see we put a bunch of spot welds again on this car, and then you can see I'm gonna stop right there. That's where it starts tripling up with all these brackets and extra plating in there. So what I do, I put rosette holes and we'll come back through on the edge and we can just MIG weld that. Like I said, anything more than 2 panels, I will go ahead, and I don't trust the spot welder, so I'll go through, MIG weld that, and you're going to see once we end up doing the MIG welds on that, we'll work our way right down the edge and we'll meet at the middle of that cowl panel on the side. There's a few brackets under here that we'll go ahead and weld, but everything I will say from the cowl panel to the firewall, all those parts fit perfect. They were flawless. They fit really good. Everything lined up the way it is. You could see it looks really good on the car. I took my measurements off the frame table going up on mine. Everything looks good. So like I said, we're back on the MIG welder. We'll work our way down. What I also like to do on the edges, you'll see once I get done with these rosette welds, I'll actually run a bead straight down this whole edge. Where the factory would have stitched it, I just weld it solid all the way down. I did it on the firewall too. This is going to really ensure that no water comes in through the top. I know this is a wet panel, but we just don't want anything coming into the car. And a lot of these channels right here, these panels go directly into the car if it's missed. So like I said, I just think that's a good weld area where it's going to be covered in seam sealer. It was covered in seam sealer from the factory anyway, but anything like this, weld it up solid. The car is going to be stronger. It's going to have less chance of leaking, and really it'll just be a better build. So right now we'll come back through and we're going to just, before we get ahead of ourselves, grind out all the welds. Most of the time I'm using 80 grit, either on the belt sander, on a surface prep disc, anything that just kind of, we can just cut down the welds really quick, very accurate without scratching everything else up. What I'll do then after I'm done with this, I'll come back through with usually I'll come back with a 120 grit quickly on a surface prep just to clean it up, and then I'll DA sand it with an 80 grit. That's going to prepare it for the epoxy primer, and once I put my next coat of epoxy primer on the front of this cowl panel firewall, it will just, you won't even be able to tell that any work was done. So what I'm doing right here, I'm using a single side. So we obviously couldn't get there with a spot welder for structure. What I like to do in a lot of these cars that are more factory looking builds is I like to replicate the factory weld. So the factory will use spot welders here, and if you see a smooth out firewall, a lot of people just know it's been replaced. If I put these welds, you see the single side, it mimics, and it's a dummy weld in the grand scheme of things. It looks like the weld was there, but it's provided no structural integrity for that panel. We're relying on the MIG welds. But if you pop the hood on one of these cars and you are one of those, Mopar people that looks for stuff like this, you'll see the spot welds, and it might make you think twice that, and I try to space those apart to make it look more like a factory weld would have happened. You can see I did space them apart. So like I said, when you look at it, if you're not looking for it, it would deceive you, and you might think that this car never had the work done. It's just a clean car. We're not trying to hide anything. You see there's epoxy underneath the cowl panel. That's obviously not factory. Anyone that looks in there is going to know that the car's obviously been pulled apart. But it's just a little touches like that I think it makes these cars go more of a long distance way. It makes it elevate it in the scheme of things. And I like to build, factory replica cars along with the full custom stuff. We just got to know the vision of the owner and where they want to go. So you can see we're now just installing a lot of these little brackets coming back, these support brackets going down to the floor pan. Now I'm just putting them, these are the original brackets, putting them back in. I knew where the weld marks were on the side inner structure panels, and you see they just basically support the side of the car. We're going to put a little bit stronger of a weld on here. The factory stitched them a little bit. I usually just weld them everywhere that touches a panel. The next bracket to be welded into place is the jack for the spare tire and everything else. You can see the jack kind of sets in this area and it gets hooked on there, and we're going to install the second part of that in a second. What I'll do, I got to come back through. There's a tie down hoop for the spring for the jack. I need to get with the owner because I didn't see that piece. That's something we might have to go ahead and add in the future. So there is supposed to be one more piece right behind the wheelhouse that I know I'm missing. We'll come back to that. I'll probably just do that off camera, but you can see this kind of is just angled down towards the back of the car. It's right in line. That's how the jack sits on there, and it goes under this back bracket you'll see in a second. You also want to see on this wheelhouse that I did cover both wheelhouses all in weld through primer. There's just so many brackets get welded to these wheelhouses. Instead of just spotting it in, I cover it all, and I'll come back through and then DA sand the weld through primer that hasn't been welded on before we put epoxy primer. So back to this back bracket, you can see looking at the view is on the right of your screen, the jack will come right back in line to that back bracket and sit under there. So now we're putting the rear window supports on the wheelhouse. So this is in a 70 and a 71 model. I believe it's halfway through 71. So correct me if I'm wrong, if you have a 72 to a 74, these brackets will not be on it, but a 70 and 71, they should have these brackets. So the last final thing we're going to wrap up on this car, we're going to install, like I said, the door skins. We have plenty of time, the whole car, there wasn't a lot shown here. So I've done a whole video on the 73 Challenger, if you go back and watch it, that's very detailed how to do door skins on an e-body car. So we're going to just dive through this real quickly. You see the inner structure of this door panel's been completely sandblasted. We did a lot of rust repair on one of these the inner door structures off camera. The AMD now I saw makes a whole bottom door repair section for these e-body cars. I got one on a future e-body that's sitting in the shop right now, the door repair patch panel. We're going to fit in a little bit, so I'm kind of curious to see how that fits. But with this door, just the corners need to be repaired, a couple of the channels. So we went and just did that, no big deal. With this door skin, you see, once the door structure is all sealed up and repaired, I also off camera epoxy coated and stripped entire inside of the door skin, and I put the weld through primer on the corners just so while we're working on it we don't disrupt it and put too much heat on it. What you're seeing right now, I put the door on the door skin. I'm sitting there and I'm hammering, dollying the whole door skin. Once I'm done with that, I come through with this door skinning tool. What it's going to do is pretty much just a flanishing hammer, with a backing plate, what we're doing right now, and it really seats the door straight and it gets it very solid and compact. That's really key. It just gives it a cleaner job than busting your wrist and hammering this down for the next 30 minutes to Sunday. You don't need this tool. It's just something I do enough of these door skins. It makes my life easier. Once I'm done with that, we come back through and weld in the top area and the bracket that didn't come on these door skins. I will say on the 73 Challenger video I did, if you go back and watch it, if you buy a Dynacorn e-body door skin, it's going to come with this cross bracket, so you wouldn't be welding this would stay on the car and you would just weld the edges. On the AMD it doesn't. To me it's all the same. Unless you need that bracket, you don't need it. So I'll show this door skin one more time. I'll try to talk you through in real life. So what I'm doing, I'm making sure my dolly stays and it's not bouncing off the door skin trying to dent it. What I'm doing, I'm using the front side, the flat side of the body hammer. I'm hammering, I'm working the edge down first. Then once I'm done working the edge kind of over, I could sit there and switch the hammer to the curved side down, and that's going to allow me to wrap around the door and bring the door skin edge all the way around. Once I get it to 60-70% there where I can get my door skinning tool in now, this is where I'm gonna go ahead and just cheat. Once I can do that, you really want to, if you are using one of these door skinning tools, or if you do end up buying them, you really have to get that door hem over all the way, because if you don't get it all the way and try to use this door skinning tool, it might try to change the edge and actually walk the edge of the door a little bit because it doesn't know where the hem edge is. So the idea is get it close with the hammer dolly first, and then you see I usually go over all sides twice. What I'm going to do right now too is come back through. If you're doing this at home, I'll put a couple little MIG holes, very small ones in here, just to hold this door skin from walking on the door. What we're doing right now, I'm putting a bunch of spot welds. The factory had, I think it was like 3 or 4 of them on each edge of the door. I'm coming back through. You can see we're going to put a bunch of them in there, and this is just going to adhere on the single side going down non-structurally to make sure the door skin doesn't walk. So the last bracket we're going to do, I should have done this on the floor pan instance, but we're just sandblasting brackets and just pulling pieces off the shelf and now assembling them all in this video. But this is for the wire loom. We're going to reuse it on the car. I made a patch on that lower bottom corner. I'll go back through and just repair that, but you can see we're putting them on there. It just sits right in place. It follows the curvature, how the floor pan's going up. You could see them in order, how it goes if you're installing this. Just be careful, even brand new, when they get worked back and forth, the tabs end up breaking. So like I said, what I like to do is install them at a 90-degree angle and then fold them down once. Like I said, we are going to go ahead at the beginning of the video and weld in the trunk drop-offs. We are not going to touch the back brackets. That's going to allow the trunk drop-offs to be able to move in and out along with that back bracket. We're also not welding them to the wheelhouses for the same reason I told you earlier. But same thing with the spot welder. I could just get in here. We're going to free up our vice grips is basically what we're doing, and then we'll just come back after the quarters fit on this car. We could go ahead and prime this area up and just make sure everything looks good. Now that we got our doors reskinned, we're gonna go ahead and install them on the car. So this just looks really cool, and it really is the first step in the process on the outer sheet metal, and it's really going to lead us into our next video and kind of getting you an idea where we're going to go with this car. So what I like to do with these doors is we like to bolt the hinges on the doors first. I like to leave them loose where they kind of can move around a little bit, but they're not drooping. I like to then put the door, get them in line on the car. We got to snug them down, and then what I like to do is adjust the front leading edge of the door at the bottom with the front leading edge of the rocker. I like to set that gap first and then work my way back. Once I get the height there set, I'll work my back of the door and I'll kind of work it up and down, you'll see, to adjust the door. I also want to make sure I tighten up the bolts coming in for the in and out movement and align that off the rocker. That's really get the idea of the doors, and then once you start getting the other panels on the car, that's when you adjust more. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up this video on the 70 Cuda build. All in all, it looks pretty good. Obviously, not too much has changed since the start of the video besides the doors panels, the wheelhouses and trunk drop-offs. But the car's starting to take shape. We have our first external skin on the car. You can see we also got the cowl panel up here in epoxy primer, everything dialed in. That's going to lead us into our next video, which is the front end install on this car. I like to do the front end first and really dial in the gaps before we get to the rear end. In the future, I'll show you why, and I feel like it's worked out in the past. I also, on these front inner fenders, I left the side brackets and the top brackets loose so we can slightly adjust the inner fenders if we have to shim the hood one way or another. That's going to help us out, but I'll show you that on another video. With the door skins, everything looks really good. We coated the inside of them with epoxy primer before the start, while we also did the inside of the cowl panel. I believe it just makes a better, well-built car to stand the test of time. Now, you can see I left the E-coat on the outside. Why we left the E-coat on the outside is this whole car is going to be E-coat on the outside initially. We're going to come back through, gap the car, and then after everything's done, we're done welding on it, then we'll come through, strip the whole external car and put it in also the gray epoxy. So with the doors, how I like to install them, I just want to go over. I like to sit there and get this bottom gap. When we bolt on the door, I like to get this bottom edge of the rocker lined up straight and parallel. Then I like to also make sure this corner coming up flows with the door angle. That's going to set the door and the first piece on the external skin and really sets the whole build process. So I think it's very crucial to get this corner and then this parallel body line down here straight. And You might have to adjust it in the future. I'm not saying it has to go here, but this is a good start when nothing else is on the car. So we'll get that on the next video. These doors still need a little bit more adjustment. We kind of just threw them up there. We'll spend a little bit more time on the other one. We're gonna just kind of hone out the hinges a little bit. That's not uncommon on all these aftermarket parts. So stay tuned for that. If you like this kind of stuff, please check out our Facebook page, Carthage Classic Cars. We put a lot of other builds besides the stuff that is only filmed on the YouTube on there, so check us out there. If you like this kind of stuff, please like, comment, subscribe to our channel. And also, if you feel like helping out and these videos help you and feel like donating and stuff, check out my buddy, Eddie, at AMD. He has a charity, the Eddy Bear Foundation. It helps children in need in the time of their hardship. So he does that by providing stuffed animals, so you could donate stuffed animals. I'll put the address in the description and a link to his website. Please check him out, eddybear.org. They also provide other comfort essentials for kids in need, whether it be emergencies, relief, just any kind of hardship a child can go through. He does a great job with that, and that's a great charity. So really, if you're, have the opportunity and things are going well and you could donate to that, please check it out. If you're going to donate stuffed animals, make sure they're brand new, the tags are still on them, and they're not wrapped up. And just, you can mail them to that address, follow the link to his website, and let's just help it out. It's a good cause. I really believe in it. So like I said, I was talking to him, and we figured we could share it on the YouTube channel and maybe spread the word and help that foundation out. So again, thank you very much for sticking along. I know this wasn't like the most exciting video because, we just got the door skins on, but this part of the build, some of these builds, you throw the whole bottom of the car together and everything goes really good in like 5 steps. And then some of them is just a bunch of small patching, especially on a car that was this rusted that, even looking at right now, I still walking around the car after I thought it was done, we have to patch that wheelhouse up. So like I said, stay tuned. I'll get that done, some of the other small stuff that needs to be done before the front end off camera, and we'll come back on and we'll start bolting on the front end. I'll give you some tips and tricks on how I do one of these e-body front ends, and then the car really is going to start taking shape. So I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars. Thanks for sticking along in this video. Hope you enjoyed it. And again, go check out Eddie's foundation. I'll put a link in the description and everything, and have a good day.